It's time to take a look at what's happening around Wyoming for Tuesday, October 8th. I'm Wendy Corr, bringing you headlines from the Cowboy State Daily newsroom, brought to you by the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake. From 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday, Cowboy State Daily's Jake Nichols brings to life the latest news, weather, sports, and in-depth conversations that matter to you. Well, for the first time since the Elk Fire literally blew up overnight more than a week ago, prompting a laundry list of evacuations and threatening the rural northern Wyoming towns of Dayton and Parkman, firefighters are preparing to attack the 73,000-acre wildfire rather than react to it. Cowboy State Daily's Greg Johnson reports that the weather conditions that had spurred on the blaze backed off enough Sunday to give the Rocky Mountain Incident Management Team more opportunity to get control of the situation.
Last report, they were 10% contained with it. Best of all, Monday afternoon, some of the evacuation orders were lifted for some of the areas where people had been told to go. Not all of them, some of them, which is a good sign when you start letting people go back home, and they've been gone for a week, some of them. So,
holding at about 73,000 acres, the fire remains very active. There are 680 people working to build breaks and lines around the fire, as well as clear out or burn any fuels within where safe to do so. Central Wyoming's only dedicated cancer center is at risk of having to shut down over a nearly $2 million dispute with an insurance company. Cowboy State Daily's Leah Wolfson reports that the Rocky Mountain Oncology Center is claiming that health insurer Mountain Health Co-op is refusing to pay for $1.9 million in patient coverage, saying it overpaid that amount last year and is attempting to balance its books.
This is a huge hit for Rocky Mountain Oncology, so much so that they filed a lawsuit against Mountain Health on Friday to try to get a judge to force an injunction requiring that Mountain Health resume paying for its patients at the facility. Most importantly, in the lawsuit, Rocky Mountain Oncology argues that this could put them out of business, which would remove the only dedicated cancer center in central Wyoming.
The Oncology Center claims Mountain Health has committed breach of contract, breach of implied duty of good faith, and fair dealing. A Gillette man is in jail after police say he repeatedly stabbed a 30-year-old woman before eluding police for a day. Cowboy State Daily's Claire McFarland reports that 31-year-old John Bosch has been charged with violent crimes before, as well as failed to appear for court, prompting the judge to set bail at $750,000.
What there is a prior felony conviction for strangulation of a household member. And so the rest of the criminal history that the prosecutor, Nathan Hankey's, rattled off wasn't as violent. It was like DUI, property destruction. There was an unlawful contact, which can be, oh, I slapped you. Speaking for himself, he said, well, I actually turned myself in. Whereas the prosecutor countered, pointing to the strangulation and pointing out that he had fled in the first place, and also pointing to the violence of the crime alleged, which was a repeated stabbing of a woman's arms and torso.
His preliminary hearing is set for October 15th. Jaron Fry of Evanston is one of the many truck drivers who've responded to Hurricane Helene-affected areas to bring in much-needed fuel. To find his truck amid the hundreds, if not thousands, of relief trucks that are flowing into the south, all you have to do is look for the Wyoming state flag. Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean reports that how Fry came by that flag while in South Carolina is one that shows the Cowboy State's generous and giving spirit.
He's looking for places that have Wyoming flags. They're all closed. It's the weekend. Someone from Wyoming in Evanston called him to check on him. And as he's talking to her, he finds out her daughter lives a couple hours north of where he's stationed. So he gives her a call to check on her. And he asks her, oh, hey, by the way, is there a flag store where I could go buy a flag? Next thing he knows, he's getting a text from her. I ordered one from Amazon for you. It'll be here tomorrow.
Fry said several of the other truck drivers are quite jealous of his Wyoming flag. They're wishing they had the kind of network from back home that would lead to someone local bringing them a state flag to fly. The massive Elk Fire in the Bighorn Mountains near the towns of Dayton and Parkman is aptly named because it's roasting some of Wyoming's best elk habitat. Prominent Wyoming outdoorsman Guy Eastman told Outdoors reporter Mark Hines that while the elk themselves should be fine, they bailed down off the mountains ahead of the blaze, the fire has likely ruined the season for hunters.
It sounds like hunting seasons are pretty much done, at least in those couple of elk hunt areas and deer hunting areas that are affected, that are within that 73,000 acres. They come down to the lowlands anyway during a normal year, but they're just doing it 2 to 3 weeks early this year because the fire pushed them down. And what that means is the elk are all down low on private land, so the hunters aren't going to be able to get to them. And from a habitat perspective, it's actually good news because the burn areas should see some rich new growth in the spring, so the elk will have plenty to eat.
Hunters who drew tags for the affected elk and deer hunting areas might be able to get refunds or have those tags rolled over into the 2025 seasons, according to Wyoming Game and Fish. And now let's take a look at today's weather with Cowboy State Daily meteorologist Don Day.
There might be a few sprinkles later this afternoon and evening along the Colorado-Wyoming border and maybe near the border with Utah, but that's the best we can do for you in terms of bringing any chance of rain to the Cowboy State. We're going to continue with this warm, dry weather for a bit longer, for another week or so, although we might see a little bit of shower activity in the far western parts of the state this weekend. That's something to keep an eye on. Otherwise, more warm, dry October weather for most of you for a few more days at least.
You can get Don's full forecast on the Cowboy State Daily website. I'll be back in just 20 seconds with more news.
When we say community is the heart of Hilltop, we're talking about a team of bankers committed to improving the place we call home. A team that shows up every day to help businesses thrive and gives back to our neighbors through time, attention, and service. We're inspired by the way our bankers give back because that's one of the many qualities that makes us truly a community bank. Hilltop Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
Former Casper Police Department detectives Shannon Daly and Carrie Patrick sued Casper Police Chief Keith McFeeters and the city of Casper 2 years ago. On Monday, a lawsuit settlement agreement was released to Cowboy State Daily's Claire McFarland, awarding $200,000 to the two female detectives who accused their boss of failing to fire a male detective whom they called sexually inappropriate and retaliatory.
They sued in 2022, alleging that Chief McFeeters had allowed a hostile workplace to foment, essentially. And they blamed this on a detective who actually wasn't sued, but was a huge part of the allegations. Detective Chase Nash. They said that he would comment on his own genitalia and brag about the size and that sort of thing. I did talk to Chase Nash today, and he said this is not true. I actually wasn't the problem. They took my comments out of context, and he said that Daly, conversely, was the one who was inappropriate.
Neither McFeeters nor the city of Casper admitted to any wrongdoing, saying that they merely settled the case to save the taxpayers' money, avoid the delay and expense of trial, and prevent future litigation. Advances in technology have developed at a rapid rate over the last few years, but not so much that it gives humans the ability to control the weather. U.S. House Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, however, seemed to suggest that she believes the U.S. government has that capacity. Cowboy State Daily's Leah Wolfson spoke to Wyoming meteorologist Don Day, who said humans are a long way from being able to create the sheer energy and scale needed to instantaneously spawn a hurricane or a tornado.
Green was making these comments in response to the recent hurricane that swept through the southeast of the United States, causing extreme devastation as a result. And she was alluding to the fact that she believes that this was caused by the federal government as a way of influencing the upcoming 2024 presidential election. There's kind of always a grain of salt to almost every conspiracy theory or almost anything you hear. And in this case, the grain of salt is that there are lab experiments and research projects underway seeing how humans can affect the weather and what they can purposely do to cause weather events.
Day said he often gets people on both sides of the aisle reaching out to him to try and push him to push a political narrative within his weather reports. The classification of jackrabbits in Wyoming as predatory animals, the same classification as coyotes and wolves in most of the state, might cause some to do a double take. Don't worry, that doesn't mean there are vicious carnivorous hares lurking in the sagebrush and devastating livestock herds. Cowboy State Daily's Mark Hines reports that the term predatory is essentially a catch-all classification for animals that might become a threat or a nuisance, particularly to agriculture.
They're big, they eat a lot, they like to gobble up a lot of crops, they can procreate prolifically. I talked to some people that said in times past, jackrabbits used to be really bad. Like if you can imagine a swarm of jackrabbits gobbling up your crops. We haven't seen that in recent years, but they remain a predatory animal in Wyoming. And that basically means that they can be shot anywhere, anytime, no license, no bag limit, because they have that potential to just come in and gobble everything up.
To add another layer of complexity, jackrabbits and cottontail rabbits are also classified differently. Jackrabbits are hares, not true rabbits, as cottontails are. And Cowboy State Daily's ever-expanding newsroom includes 2 new members who are making immediate impacts behind the scenes. Justin George has been named our news editor, coming to us from the Washington Post. Justin, who was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize while working for the Baltimore Sun, says he's glad to be back in the Mountain West where he was born and raised.
It's a completely different perspective. I mean, when you've been covering things like the Baltimore Police Department crime there and the Department of Justice and very serious, sort of weighty matters, it's kind of fun to read stories about wildlife, about grizzlies, about, things like that. I think it's important for journalists to have a different perspective, living in different places and understanding the population so you get a better understanding of America overall.
Cowboy State Daily's new chief videographer is Riley Strand. Besides editing this daily newscast, Riley will be telling stories of Wyoming through the lens of a camera. He says working for Cowboy State Daily offers him exciting opportunities.
So I think what excites me most about working for Cowboy State Daily is, one, just being able to tell visual stories in a state that has kind of an abundance of really great visual stories, and 2, being part of an organization, a media organization that's really pushing the limits of what modern journalism looks like, which is really needed right now in places like the state of Wyoming.
And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the daily newsletter button on cowboystatedaily.com. And you can watch this newscast every day by clicking subscribe on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to drop in on the Cowboy State Daily Morning Show with Jake Nichols, Monday through Friday from 6 to 10 a.m. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Wendy Corr for Cowboy State Daily.